this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 56 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Transport, Infrastructure and Communities. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, February 3rd, 2022, the committee is meeting to discuss its study of intercity transport by bus in Canada and for committee business. Today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June 23rd, 2022. Members can attend in person in the room or remotely using Zoom.
Wish to inform the committee before we proceed that all witnesses have been tested for today's meeting and have passed the sound test for the benefit of our translators. With us today, appearing before committee as witnesses, are Dr. Joanne Jaffe, Professor, Department of Sociology and Social Studies, University of Regina, by video conference. Welcome. And Dr. Adele Perry, Distinguished Professor, History and Women's and Gender Studies, once again by video conference. We have from Bus Carriers Federation, Monsieur Pierre Mahou, administrateur, bienvenue.
We have the Union of Municipalities of Quebec, Mr. Daniel Côté, President by video conference, and Samuel Leroy, also by video conference.
Finally, we have from from DRL Coach Lines Limited, we have Jason Roberts, General Manager by video conference. We will begin our opening remarks today with Dr. Joanne Jaffe. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm joining from Treaty 4, and I'm going to make 4 points. First, that transportation is critical infrastructure, and this is true for rural and remote communities as much as it is for urban. Second, the right to stay in rural places and the ability to live a good life are increasingly contingent on the right to move. That is, on mobility, the ability to get around as one needs and wants. Third, mobility is more and more an intersection of inequality, particularly for already disadvantaged rural and remote people. Fourth, the market cannot be expected to solve this problem. Innovative, integrative, system-wide public and cooperative models are needed to realize the full potential and benefits of public transportation. I will take these in turn. Transportation is critical development overhead capital. It is critical infrastructure for rural places, the absence of which results in disadvantages and vulnerability for rural communities and the people who live there. Transportation substantially influences how and where social and economic activities take place and the development path of rural communities. It plays a crucial role in shaping the relationship between places and the flows of people, goods, and services. However, it is easy to overlook the networks and systems that constitute critical infrastructure because the roles they play in enabling activities and providing public and private goods and services are often invisible. So transport policy is economic policy, rural development policy, agricultural policy, health policy, environmental policy, cultural policy, and mental health and anti-loneliness policy. It is also reconciliation policy. The right to stay in rural places and our right to vibrant, sustainable rural places is increasingly dependent on mobility, what people sometimes call accessing the rights to the city in and from rural places. Rural restructuring in Canada has meant more inequality in rural places, more poverty and food insecurity, more low-wage and temporary workers, and more immigrants, while services, both public and private, are leaving rural places and centralizing in larger towns and cities. People are increasingly living their lives across regions with jobs, education, family, healthcare, social services, shopping, and leisure activities spread across distances. As the private sector and governments improve their bottom lines through consolidations and service reductions, these costs are transferred onto rural users who must pay more, travel farther, or forego services. These same people are less likely to have access to communications technologies to compensate for the loss of transportation and access to services. For example, to the ability to find medical advice or shop online. For people to live and thrive in rural places, they need transportation. Places play a role in perpetuating poverty, as does the uneven development between places. Constraints on transport-based accessibility tend to deepen these social spatial inequalities, leading to multidimensional deprivations and eventually poverty traps. They also intensify and worsen the experience of disability and make it harder to leave situations of domestic violence and abuse. In contrast, transportation accessibility and mobility in poor regions can improve access to higher quality public goods and social services for disadvantaged people living in those areas and promote poverty alleviation and better quality of life for both individuals and communities. But we should not expect the market to solve this problem. As opposed to democracy, in which it is one person, one vote, markets respond to money, and more money equals more votes. And they respond to the possibilities of private profitability. Depending on markets to decide whether or how transportation operates is unlikely to yield solutions to the problems I have outlined here. Besides, society has created an uneven playing field between public transportation and private automobiles, with the entire system shaped by automobility, the default assumption of widespread access to and dependence on the car, and pervasive but mostly invisible subsidies to automobiles and trucks in the form of public dollars going to construction and maintenance of physical infrastructure, and in dealing with the effects of accidents, pollution, and lost opportunities. Governments can and do intervene in transportation networks to shape systems that better reflect public policy objectives, for example, to facilitate access to healthcare, education, and work. It is true that improving transportation can be a double-edged sword for rural regions. The wrong investments can advantage richer regions at the expense of poorer areas. However, with proper consultation and recognition of local needs, the effect of public transportation investments are likely to be equality enhancing and poverty alleviating, benefiting both populations and regions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaffe, and I'd like to take a special moment to welcome back Dr. Perry. And good to see you again. We look forward to hearing from you at this meeting. Next, prochainement, nous avons Monsieur...
Next, we have Mr. Maheu. You have the floor for 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. My name is Pierre Maheu from Maheu Bus Systems, which is a family business founded in 1958, so it's actually 55 years old today. And we do school transportation, intercity transportation, chartered bus tours, and that type of thing. More specifically, in our region around Abitibi-Témiscamingue, we took over 9 intercity bus routes in that region, as well as in Montreal and the Outaouais region. We have about 200 vehicles and quite a lot of staff. We have expertise in this area, and we try to serve the regional population with intercity routes that are often hit pretty hard. So if you look at the rural region, particularly in Quebec, it really faces a significant problem. There's a problem with ridership. In 2022, ridership was not at all what it was back in 2019. For most of us transporters, we're still recovering. And particularly for regional bus lines, like from Val d'Or to Montreal, financially, we used to be able to, like that one route used to be able to offset other regional routes that didn't make as much money. But that's not so much the case anymore. That's something I can talk about more during the question period. So I'm really speaking on behalf of my company, but I'm also an administrator at the Bus Federation in Quebec, the Bus Carriers Federation in Quebec. And I mention that because as an administrator here and also in a previous career, I used to come make the same arguments to the federal government back in the day, and I'm still making the same arguments. I appeared before the Senate Committee of Transport in 2002, and the problem is still the same. As the witness before me mentioned, it's particularly difficult in rural areas. And while transportation and many of the programs that support it are really of provincial jurisdiction, the federal government does have an important role to play. And as I said way back in 2002, the federal government isn't there to regulate provincial support programs, but it does have a role to play in intercity bus transport. If you look at Via Rail, for example, it receives huge amounts of money, and yet it is still able to compete on different lines between Montreal, Quebec, and other routes. So I think that the federal government could be providing more support for some rural regions. That would make a huge difference. If you have 25 passengers on an urban line, 25 passengers might not seem like a lot, but on a regional line, 25 passengers is a really big difference. Even 10 passengers makes a big difference. That could be the difference between a route existing and not existing anymore. So I know that federal governments don't always love to target their money to rural areas. It's not always a priority for them. You want to focus on public transport in really dense population areas like urban centers. That makes sense. But there are these regional lines that have been abandoned in some cases, and they deserve attention. So in terms of financial support that the federal government could provide, I have some proposals to make, but I would just say that 50% of our ridership is on the main line, and we've seen a 30% decrease in ridership on that line compared to 2019. On other lines, we've seen declines as steep as 50% in ridership, and some of those regional routes have seen declines of 20-25%. So generally, if you're close to an urban center like Montreal or Sherbrooke, it's not as bad. But even in Sherbrooke, I was told there's a decline of 20-25% in ridership. And I think if you want to understand the problems in some smaller cities, if you look at Breton bus service in Beauce, for example, there will now no longer be any routes between Beauce and Sainte-Marie and other cities in the region. We won't have those lines anymore, and that's a line that's comparable to the one near Thunder Bay. So a lot of these lines are running on a deficit, and they're only surviving through provincial aid from the government of Quebec. So I think that the federal government has a more important role to play there. Thank you very much. I do have other things to say, but I understand that, I'm limited in my time, so thank you. Yes, there will be follow-up questions. Thank you.
We have Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Good day, good day. I just didn't get the interpretation of our follow speaker previous, okay? So I'm going to go with what I got, not to in turn to his. The bus situation in Canada, and as one of our speakers spoke before, it's very, very binding to bring areas of our province and our country together with the outlying areas, the rural areas. And for me in Newfoundland, we call it the Trans-Canada, from Port aux Basques to St. John's. St. John's being a major hub, and most of the major activities that happens in someone's life will take place in St. John's, be it medical, be it the largest airport, the full gamut of whatever takes place. For me, I've been at this for 27 years, operating from St. John's to Port aux Basques. After the Crown Corporation gave it up because they were losing so much money, we decided to buy it. And I think one of the biggest things I want to really stress to everybody here is that out-migration, the numbers are coming down. But even with the numbers being stable right now, and they are pretty good right now, okay, on the number of people that's using the transportation, it's always very interesting to me why we as a carrier going to the major centers and back and forth to all the other towns and cities in between, why is it that we are treated different than our metropolitan areas that get this great big subsidy to operate their service? And where do we stand? I can use our Metrobus service in St. John's, Newfoundland. Between Metrobus, the hub, and Wheelway, which is three different divisions of the city transit, they receive approximately, I'm going to stay on the safe side, $16 million a year subsidy to operate the service. They service around 200,000 people. We service 250,000 people, and we get no money, none. It was the comment made yesterday on the news in Newfoundland about the province would love to see more inner city, rural transit to come to be available to help with pollution, to help with whatever greenhouse gases, the old gamut. But to me, just leave the greenhouse gases. I look at for society to be treated equal. We want equality of some degree across the province of Newfoundland, across those provinces in Canada. We need, and I don't care who does it. I'll give it up to the government. If they want to do it and subsidize it, it doesn't matter. The reason I've kept going and we've kept going is that we feel it's detrimental if we don't. It's one more thing gone out of our society that will never be if someone like ourselves don't keep it going and always living for the brighter day. I'm living for the brighter day when there's going to be a little more people, a little more availability of some funds to help with capital infrastructure. It just amazes me how big announcement St. John's yesterday was electrifying the Metro buses. But we still got to go and pay our price for our nice Prevost to go up and down the road there, and we get nothing. It really makes me wonder on the full picture, how can this not be fixed and be treated a little more equality across the full country? How can we not make this happen and look and say, okay, you're running this route, we're the only operator. When we stop, it's over because no one else is going to be crazy enough to do it. I can promise you. Okay. And just thank God that I'm operating some other business and I'm still living for the big day for this to really earn its own way. 27 years. No, it still don't happen. I've been promised and committed to for umpteen years. Okay. For 15, 20 years, there's money going to become available. There's infrastructure money available. Newfoundland got $111 million for infrastructure funds for transportation. But guess what? We're not including that. It's just the city of St. John's and city of Corner Brook. They don't know where to spend it to. They got so much money, they don't know where to spend it. It's going to go back to the federal coffers, okay? What a better place to put some of that. I would operate 3 times a day right across the island. If I had per capita, the people that we're serving in comparison to the city with their subsidies, I would offer service that you would be blown away what you could do in Newfoundland by getting on public transit. It would really, really make, and it would give you interest and that someone really cares. Like right now, I don't think anyone cares. Like, leave it, let it die, drop, go away. When it's over, it's done and gone, and it's forgot about. But I can promise you, we're not going away yet. And we got to keep going because we have people who depend on this. I ran through COVID, and there was days that I ran 2 motor coaches, 2,000 kilometers for as little as $800 in a day with no compensation whatsoever, none whatsoever. But there was some people who needed to get to that doctor and never had no other way to go. And I feel a little bit of commitment to society to try to keep this going as long as we can. But believe me and you, some subsidy of some help. And I don't care how it's done. I don't want to make money for me. Just make it break even. I want to keep it going. It's a bit of our culture. We're 102 years in business, our company. This is our 102nd year. This is something we took on 30 years ago, and we don't run away from things easy. Mr. Rogers is there, and he's from Newfoundland. He knows we don't run away. So But I really, really think that some
Thank
way,
you.
some shape, we should make this happen. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your opening remarks, Mr. Roberts. Prochainement, next, nous avons Monsieur.
We have Mr. Cote and Mr. Roy. You have 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, members of the committee, and thank you also to the other witnesses for being here. I'm Danielle Cote. I'm the mayor of Gaspé in Quebec and also representative of the Union of Quebec Municipalities, and I'm here with Mr. Roy. Thank you for giving us the floor today as part of this study. First of all, I would say that for over 100 years now, our union has been bringing together different municipalities from across Quebec in order to mobilize municipal expertise, help support our members in their operations, and promote municipal democracy. We represent over 85% of the population of Quebec and 95% of municipal budgets in Quebec. So for us, the ability for people to move across a big territory like Quebec is really important in terms of stimulating economic vitality and also for connecting rural regions. Regions deserve to be connected to big urban centers and also connected to each other through reliable transportation networks and to ensure access to services and jobs. A not insignificant part of intercity transport in Quebec is carried out by private transport companies. Since the pandemic, as other people have mentioned, there's been a decrease in frequency and also a decrease in ridership on a number of bus lines. People often talk about the line between Quebec City and Montreal, which is the big route in Quebec, but you could also mention Quebec City and Havre-Saint-Pierre on the North Shore or Saint-Siméon in Charlevoix and others. When the profitability isn't there, often it's just not profitable for people to operate these lines, and that really has an impact on those regions. So we need funding from municipal governments. That's what's currently keeping these lines afloat. I'd like to make 2 recommendations on behalf of the union to improve intercity bus transportation. First recommendation, to modify the Rural Transport Solutions Fund and give more money to it so that it can meet its objectives. We also believe that the fund should allow for operational spending. And I really insist on operational spending, not just infrastructure. This will help maintain services, intercity bus services. There are really significant needs on the ground, so strengthening those budgets, giving more money to those funds would help us strengthen our current services. Second recommendation is that the federal government and the government of Quebec quickly work to establish permanent agreements to allow for the Rural Transport Solutions Fund and the Zero Emissions Transport Fund sums to be distributed. Currently, municipalities in Quebec are the only ones that don't have access to those 2 funds. We can discuss the reasons for that in the question period. And yet we need that money in order to meet the needs of municipalities and operators on an ongoing basis. For example, there was a temporary agreement from August 2022 that allowed us to fund some projects, but there were other projects that weren't included in the agreement and that didn't get any funding, even though the federal government had welcomed their requests. In terms of the Zero Emissions Transport Fund, implementing it should allow us to move forward more quickly on electrification, and that's really essential if we want to be able to meet our greenhouse gas reductions targets that were set by the federal government. So to conclude, intercity transport allows us to really fight against the isolation of rural communities and help economic vitality. It's important in urban centers, but it's really essential in rural areas. And we need the federal and provincial government to work together so that operators and municipalities in Quebec have access to the funding they need to make sure that intercity bus transport can be supported on an ongoing permanent basis. So I'll stop there and wait for questions. Thank you.
Mr. Cote,
Thank you very much.
transition to the question period of this meeting, and we'll start off with Mr. Strahl. Mr. Strahl, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to everyone for your presentation. I did want to talk a bit about we heard about funding and subsidized ridership, et cetera, and I wanted to get into that a little bit. I think what we've heard previously is that there is an enormous subsidy per rider for something like Via Rail, and obviously there are massive investments, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, going into more money for Via. And I think what I note about that line, certainly what we've heard about the Windsor Quebec City corridor is already quite urban. It's already quite well served by other modes of transport. It's not that difficult to get to a major airport, for instance, from places along that line, and yet there is still an effort to increase service and pour billions of dollars of government subsidies into it. So I'd like to follow up with Mr. Roberts, who, you know, I found your testimony compelling when you talked about what you could do if you were given a bit of support. I guess what is your view when you see the federal government putting billions of dollars into well-served markets, while markets like yours for in Newfoundland and Labrador are, you know, as you said, you get nothing. Is there an equality issue here that you feel needs to be addressed, and how should the government address it? Obviously, Via is a Crown corporation. I'm not sure if your brighter day would include being made into a Crown corporation, but I'm interested to know how you think the federal government could support those rural communities and individuals that don't have easy access to other modes of transport and would rely almost exclusively on the bus if they're looking for a option other than a personal vehicle.
Sorry, sir, you're on mute. Just have to make sure that. Let's check.
With me?
I think we can hear you now, sir.
Good. Sorry for that. We speak about equality, and I just look at, we'll leave Via Rail for a minute, because that's right in the major hub of the world, okay? I just look at equality when it comes to a smaller city, even Corner Brook in Newfoundland, which is a very small city, do get funds from the infrastructure fund for transit. If we could avail of a portion of the funds there like that, even as a private operator, I know sometimes you look at private operator, but throw it on the table. There's the books. Here's where we're to. Look at what the cost per kilometer for Metrobus is, or some transit or whatever, and look at what we can do it for. I think one way it can be done is if there was some assets, being motor coaches, that could be put there to operate. Just some way to recoup some of the costs. And what kind of service do you really want to have? We're running once a day from St. John's Port aux Basques. It's 1,000 kilometers each way, 986 kilometers each way. It's a long jag. But with very little help per kilometer per year, it would make a significant difference in what we could carry out as a enhanced service with twice a day, you know, for a portion of the area. Try to give more availability. So the dollar value is not significant to make this happen. And we're the last game. When we stop, there's no public transit across the island. We're it. It's not like somewhere where you're saying you got Via Rail and you got some operators and you got some shuttles and you got whatever. No one's leaving Port aux Basques, Newfoundland on a shuttle bus and going to St. John's, okay? 986 kilometers. It's not happening. They're not going from Corner Brook. They're not going from central Newfoundland. It just don't happen. And not only that, we operate in some pretty harsh, rough conditions there. And if we're not out there in something that's good, dependable, and durable, as my good Newfoundland saying will go, we'll be in the rhubarb before you know it. Okay. So, we got to operate this so that we don't be where we don't want to be. Okay. Thanks.
Right. I appreciate that. Sound like my my old logger father there for a minute. Mr. Mayhew, you mentioned that perhaps governments aren't as interested in funding activities in rural Canada as they are in urban Canada. I think you mentioned the governments maybe there's the cost-benefit analysis. A dollar spent in an urban centre where there's a lot more voters is perhaps prioritized. Can you just give a little bit more on how you feel the government needs to, or should the government have a rural transit strategy or a rural equality between urban and rural when it comes to serving populations? I'll say I think that urban centers have a lot of options. People in urban centers often have many choices on how they get around. But in rural Canada, perhaps that's not the case. Maybe you can expand on that.
Yes, thank you. In French, I'm very bad in English.
So there's definitely a big difference between the needs in rural areas and urban areas. And the treatment of those areas is not the same either. But as Mr. Roberts said, there's this 250,000, but for our network and many networks in Quebec, we don't have 250,000. You're looking at cities that have 3,000, 5,000, 10,000 people who want to travel to another city, 50 kilometers away that might have 40,000 people. But then the 10 people from Ville-Marie or whatever who need to go to a hospital in Rouyn-Noranda, that's as important for them as it is for somebody in Montreal to get to the hospital. So definitely the needs are not being met. And despite people's good will or good intentions, the federal government is not really acting. In its first term, the current government announced millions, even billions in infrastructure funding. If you look at projects in Montreal, for example, or OC Transpo, Toronto, Vancouver, the funding was really, really concentrated on those big urban centers, which makes sense. That's where a lot of the population is. But at the same time, in 2017, they announced they would be getting rid of the transport tax credit or tax deduction. And yet, it's the transport users who really need the help. In smaller areas, more rural areas, they really needed that help. Yeah. Unfortunately, we're out of time. I think that somebody else might be following up with a very similar question.
Over to Mr. Chahal for his line of questioning. I wanted to make sure that Mr. Roberts, that you finally have translation to ensure that any of the Francophone members who'd like to ask you questions are able to do so. Did you receive the member, sir, from our clerk? Perfect.
Thank you, I did.
Great. And we've also resolved issues with Ms. Perry. Ms. Perry, I want you to deliver your opening remarks. Can you do that, or would you be willing to do that now?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Professor Perry. We'll turn the floor over to you. You have 5 minutes.
Sure. I'd like to thank the committee and the staff for helping me appear virtually from Treaty 1 territory. I do so as a settler whose primary expertise is in the field of history. But on the topic that concerns this particular committee, I want to share some of the central findings of research that I undertook with Dr. Corinne Duhamel and Dr. Jocelyn Thorpe that examined the existing literature that connected the changing landscape of intercity transportation in Western Canada with a particular focus on Manitoba and the ongoing crisis of murdered and missing Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people. The continent-wide shift toward auto mobility hit Manitoba in a particular way. Many of the smaller bus lines and passenger train routes closed in the 1970s, 80s, and 1990s. And it is within this context that the near kind of collapse of intercity bus transit occurred in the 2010s. Of course, as we are all aware, Greyhound withdrew from its already diminished Western Canadian routes in 2018. In the same year, Jefferson Lines canceled its remaining trip running between Winnipeg and Fargo, North Dakota. A year later, the third company to try the Winnipeg-Selkirk route in a decade ceased operation. 5 years later, it is clear that the existing landscape is not sufficient to maintain reliable fixed schedule bus routes in the province. There's a shifting patchwork of operators covering some routes at some times. Only 2 offer daily service, the shuttle running between Brandon and Winnipeg's airport, and NCN bus lines owned by Nishishiwayat Cree Nation running a Winnipeg-Thompson route. You can take Maple bus lines from Winnipeg to Thompson 5 days a week, and Mahayakin from Winnipeg to Flin Flon 5 days a week, and Ontario Northland 6 days a week. And as a sidebar, I'll note that the relative strength of north-south links in comparison to east-west ones suggests the importance of Indigenous governments to any transit solutions in this context. But there is only 1 bus running weekly from Winnipeg to Regina, leaving after midnight on Saturdays. In late January 2023, you could book a trip through from Winnipeg to Vancouver that would take 3 transfers, cost about $419, and take about 37 hours. But something has changed since then, and as of that last night, that route was no longer available. And that leaves Via Rail's twice weekly trip between Toronto and Winnipeg, with all of the limitations this committee is well aware of, as the only possible public transit connecting Western Canada's eastern and western parts. The highly limited and confusing possibilities of existing intercity bus travel in Manitoba affect some people and communities more than others, as Dr. Jaffrey has spoken to. We have too little data on exactly who depends on the bus in the age of automobility and air travel. The cratering of intercity transit operations in Manitoba and the prairies as a whole means it is difficult to collect the kind of data that we all agree needs to be gathered to design the sort of transportation system that will adequately serve people and communities that they are a part of in the 21st century. But we know that women have a greater reliance on public transit around the world and within Canada. We know that around 18% of people in Manitoba are First Nations, Inuit, or Métis. We know that national patterns of violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people come to rest in particular ways in this place. And we know that Indigenous peoples experience higher rates of poverty that make the shifts towards automobility come to rest in particular ways. That the sharp diminution of intercity transit options had implications for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirited people was a point made in the wakes of Greyhound's withdrawal from its Western Canadian routes. The Native Women's Association of Canada explained in 2018 that they were, and I quote here, deeply concerned for the safety of Indigenous women, girls, and gender-diverse people. A year later, the final report of the National Inquiry on Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women offered an important analysis of public transit, one that I think deserves more attention than it has received in this context. Chapter 7 in particular explains how a lack of safe and affordable transportation can mean that people are forced to rely on methods such as walking or hitchhiking, not only to escape dangerous situations, but simply to travel for education or for employment. In this way, inadequate infrastructure and transportation, or transportation that itself becomes a site for violence, effectively, and I quote here, punishes Indigenous women. 2 of the national inquiries calls for justice directly concern transportation. 4.8 calls upon, and I quote, all governments to ensure that adequate plans and funding are put in place for safe and affordable transit and transportation services and infrastructure for Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people living in remote and rural communities. In conclusion, I would say that effective transit policy must consider the needs and lived experiences of its users, who are not interchangeable, but people whose lives are shaped at the intersection of gender, of economic resources, of location, of indigeneity. The current lack of intercity public transit in Manitoba is a crisis in service, but it is also, by extension, one in data. Learning about the users of a service that currently does not exist presents particular challenges. One thing that I would urge your committee to do is to listen to those who have connected the lack of a reliable, accessible intercity public transit options to ongoing patterns of violence against women, and particularly violence against Indigenous women, girls, and Two-Spirit Plus people, and consider how a revitalized network of national transportation might play a role in addressing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Perry, and thanks once again for your patience with some of the audiovisual challenges we have had. So now we'll turn it over to Mr. Chahal. Mr. Chahal, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for all the witnesses for providing testimony today. We've had a really good discussion on the impact to rural communities, and in 2017, the Saskatchewan provincial government ended its public funding for the Saskatchewan Transportation Company after 71 years. And so, Dr. Jaffe, I want to direct this question to you, for being from Saskatchewan. What rationale did the province offer at the time for eliminating public funding for the Saskatchewan Transportation Company, and what was the impact on the community?
Thank you so much for that question. That, I think, is a very important question, both because the STC was, I think, a very good example of what a provincial bus service could look like and did look like. And it begins to show us what happens when you shut these services down. And of course, we don't have as much information as we need at this point, but there have been some studies that have been done, including some that I have, at least one that I've participated in. The rationale by the provincial government was quite simply that, or the stated rationale, I should say, was quite simply that they felt that ridership was declining and that the per passenger subsidy, and in particular, what they were talking about was the per passenger cost for the province was continuing to increase. And this was in light of the fact that the provincial government was actually starting to make it more difficult for people to ride the bus, I will say. They were there. This was in the face of rising prices. As ridership was going up, the province ceased advertising for the bus. They put some straitjackets on the way the bus was operating in terms of its ability to offer charters and under what conditions and what those costs would be and so on. So they actually set up a situation in which the cost per rider would be higher than it might be otherwise. The impact has been quite interesting, and that is to say that although supposedly the ridership was low, the riders that were using the bus were very dependent upon it. And I also might add, before I elaborate that, because I don't want to forget this point, that this bus was not just used for riders. It was also used to move goods around the province. It was used to move lab tests for soils, for medical services. It was used to move blood. It was used to, when prisoners were released from prison, to take them back to their home communities. There were so many things that people were depending on for that bus. So that, and of course, it had a low-cost service for people to be able to get to their health services. When the bus shut down, it had a tremendous impact on many people. So besides the fact that we can talk about the inequalities, which Dr. Perry referred to, which were quite significant here. We know that most of the people who used the bus were women, they were elderly, they were First Nations, and they were overwhelmingly young. So those and they tended to be lower income. So those folks were left often without any options. In some cases, people have moved to cities to get closer to their health services. In some cases, they're going without. We're hearing about people going without. We're hearing about people who are having difficulty getting out of problems of domestic violence. We're seeing more people hitchhiking. We're also hearing in rural areas about businesses that are beginning to shut down because the small subsidies that they were receiving to be the depots in rural places, that now has made the difference for them in terms of their sustainability. farmers are having more trouble getting parts, and that's particularly small farmers and medium-sized farmers who were depending on the bus in order to access parts from the city. The impacts are so large and so interesting in how they, you have the first order impacts, the second order impacts on people. It really is something which I think in many ways was not predicted by the folks who ended up taking that decision. And it is a decision that refuses to die. I was out in a rural area last weekend talking to some folks who normally vote Saskatchewan Party, and they said to me that this is the one decision that would make them leave the party. It was very interesting because they felt that it affected so many people across the board, and it was such an ill-considered decision that it makes them question the capability of the party to govern the province.
Thank you for that in-depth answer. You actually answered several of my questions with that, so thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chahal, and thank you, Dr. Jaffe. Next, we have, prochainement, nous avons Mr. Barcelou-Duval.
Mr. Barcelou-Duval, you have 6 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome to all the witnesses. Very happy to have you with us today. So I'm going to start with Mr. Maheu from the Bus Transporters Federation. Earlier in your presentation, you talked about the fact that it can be hard to get the ridership that was there before, not just for your company, but for other companies as well. It seems that post-pandemic, ridership levels are just not what they used to be, and that it's, it takes a long time to recover. Do you think that the recovery will happen? That's my first question. And secondly, for people who currently don't go out, aren't using the bus system, who used to do that, does that mean they just aren't moving at all, or does it mean they're using other ways of getting around? Well, I wish I could say that I was an expert after several years of working in the industry, but I do have to be humble here. I think that for shorter distances, I talked about the Montreal-Sherbrooke route, and in that case, it's really due to teleworking that people aren't taking the bus as often. For bigger distances, I think that the cost of transportation is a big factor and a big hindrance. There's been a really big increase in the cost of transportation. And in intercity transport, because we're dealing with private companies, well, unlike the public companies, the customer pays 100%. Whereas revenue for those routes, customer fees are only about 35% of our operating costs. So when the bus leaves from Joliette and goes to Montreal, but it's under a contract with a different company, the customer pays, $5 or $7. But for a private service, they might have to pay $25 or $30. So in our rural areas, normally the user should be able to have access to those services, not only to go to the hospital for a cancer treatment, but for other, pleasurable things as well, visiting family, that type of thing. So there really are two different standards here. And when you're talking about, quite far-flung regions, I'll come back to what Ms. Perry said about Indigenous people and what Ms. Jaffe said about Saskatchewan. We have a new line from Val d'Or to Chisasibi near James Bay. We started that in 2016. It's 1,000 kilometers one way. You pass by a number of small towns, but you manage to serve all of these tiny little communities along the route. And that's not because we're getting aid from the federal government. That's because Indigenous communities and the Cree Grand Council decided to invest money in that route, in a fund in Quebec that allows us to use that money to finance our private operating costs. So it's obvious to me that the private operators are the solution. And Mr. Strahl earlier was talking about operators, and one of the reasons that it didn't work in Saskatchewan is because the Saskatchewan bus line had, its operating costs were too high. Their cost per kilometer was double what it was for us. So at a certain point, yes, you want to provide the service, but there's a limit to what people can pay for when the operating costs are really high. Of course, we want to provide good labor conditions, respect all the rules, make sure that the vehicles are safe. So I think that for these longer distances, private transporters really are the solution. And for rural areas, Ms. Jaffe is right. There's the whole issue of transporting goods and packages as well that contributes financially. And there are other smaller measures that could be taken as well. If anyone wants to ask me that question. I'm almost out of time, but I do just have a brief question. What financial supports do private operators have access to right now from the federal government? Well, from the federal government, as far as I know, we're not actually getting any direct funding from the federal government, contrary to the provincial government. That's why Mr. Cote was talking about modifying the federal, the rural transport fund. And they don't get anything for infrastructure? Well, I'd have to look at my notes here, but since 2018, the Government of Canada has had a number of tax advantages for operators. So we're entitled to $1.5 million, and that's money that we can use for procurement or expenses. And that definitely helps. But when you think of communities or measures to help users in particular, if you'll allow me, I'm so sorry we're out of time. Hey, don't you want to hear my proposals? Yes. And Mr. Berceau-Duval will have another 2.5 minutes later. Thank you very much.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. This has been some great testimony. As someone who represents a very rural part of Canada, dominated by very small communities, many of them remote, Dr. Jaffe, what you said about rural equity really hit home. And is a dominant theme in the region I represent. So I'd like to start with some questions for you. I'd like you to imagine that you're the federal minister of transport, knowing what you do about the need for rural equity and the importance of rural communities in the fabric of our country. What would you do when it comes to the need for bus transportation? What federal approach would you take as minister?
Oh man, don't give me the easy question. So yeah, that is a tough question, but I think there are some things I think we need to consider. And that is, I think, to remember so there are a few principles I think we want to remember to begin with, including the issues around the fact that this transport policy does impact all these other policies, and that transportation also facilitates many other activities and programs and policies in rural places. And so one of the things to understand is that the cost of transport is also a cost which can be attributed across these other activities. I think we also want to remember that other kinds of activities receive certain kinds of subsidies. So we've talked about automobility today, and we've talked about the way that systems of transportation have developed so that they really favor the automobile and they favor trucks, and they essentially externalize the costs of automobiles and trucks onto the general public. And so their costs are actually higher than they appear to be. So keeping those two things in mind, I think that's where I would start. And then I would also understand that there are many kinds of, I think, creative solutions that one can engage in at this point, and that one can take advantage of, for example, new technologies. One can be thinking in some ways about developing systems of transportation so that you can take advantage of things which are happening in other places and sort of piggyback on systems which are already in place. So you can also, I think one of the important things, and this is taking this in a direction I think that perhaps is a little bit less expected. We need to start to change what it means to ride the bus and what it means to use public transportation, and particularly in rural areas. So that includes both paying attention to sort of, if you will, the marketing aspects of transportation, but also thinking about the services that are available and how people are able to rely upon the bus. The gentleman from Newfoundland who was talking about being able to offer the bus more frequently, I think is really thinking about this in the right way. We know that when people have more access to public transportation and when it's quite reliable, they know that it's there and it's safe, they tend to use it more. On the other hand, I think one thing that we tend to do, well, speaking about Saskatchewan here, is as costs go up, we tend to retract services, which means that people use them less. So what we need to do is to really thinking about the expansion of service, and then what people are looking for in these services. And as Dr. Perry was talking about, looking at the different users of and potential users of services, and the needs that they have in order to use these services, so that they are responding to the actual needs that people are expressing. So that's where I would start.
Thank you, Dr. Jaffe. I'm interested in a few aspects of what you said. One of the themes that has really dominated this study on bus transport is the question of the best model to pursue nationally, whether it be a purely public model, whether it be a purely private model, or whether it be some sort of hybrid in between. Now, you've advocated quite strongly for a public approach to bus transport. Could you talk briefly about why you advocate for that approach?
I advocate for that approach for several reasons. One is that we tend to see in many places, and again, Dr. Perry alluded to this, about how you look one day and these services are available, and then another day they're not available, that private operators must respond to conditions of private profitability. This is no criticism of them. It is just simply the reality of participating in a capitalist market, that you have to respond to private profitability. And generally speaking, you're looking for lower costs. If we use STC as an example, this was a service that, yes, it's true, operated at perhaps a higher cost than the private sector, but it also had very good conditions of work. It had union labor. It had a very high proportion of its workers being of Indigenous status. people with disabilities and so on. It had many women working in management. It was using a multiple evaluation called the Balanced Scorecard in order to make sure that it was satisfying multiple sets of objectives, not just moving people from place to place, but doing it in such a way that they were satisfied, that it was meeting environmental objectives, and a whole
Thank
variety
you.
of things. Sorry, I'm running out of time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Jaffe.
I talk too much.
Mr. Bachrach will have another round, though, so perhaps he'll want to continue along the line of questioning. Next, we have Mr. Muse. Mr. Muse, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for your perspectives today. I'd like to ask Mr. Roberts, you mentioned, and I think hopefully I heard this correctly, that the service has been running for 102 years in Newfoundland across, that's a very large, expansive 1,000-kilometer trek, as you've indicated, and your commitment to maintaining that, to offer service to people in all parts of Newfoundland is laudable, and you certainly make some good points. So maybe just so we can understand, and I'm presuming that over the course of 102 years, there's been times when it's been profitable, times when it's not been profitable, there's been peaks and valleys, and maybe there's a trend line. So maybe you can speak a little bit about that.
Okay, I'll just clarify. We as a company has been in business for 102 years. Our bus business has been on the go for 30 years. We took it over from Canadian National when they privatized it back in 1996. They were losing $3.6 million a year the last year when we looked at their books, operating the service across the island. We still decided to buy it, believe it or not. Okay, so you want to tell me there's a lot wrong? Yeah, there is. Okay. But over that period of time, there were some decent times, but as you know, more and more people become dependent on the automobile and the independence to go when they want to and when they could. But to show credibility where we've been to, the service that was offered when Road Cruiser, which was a division of CN, operated off a run per day, St. John's Port aux Basques, over the last 30 years, there's only 41 days that we have not operated, and that's due to weather. Every other day, the schedule is as close as we can keep it for weather and conditions that we have not bowed out and said, no, we're not going. During COVID, there was days there was 3 people on the bus. We still left Port aux Basques and went to St. John's. So there's an expression in Newfoundland that if the bus is not going, don't no one else move. It's not fit. It's not good. It's not whatever. They always call and say, if the bus is going, it means that there's a possibility you might be able to go. So credibility about running, yes. Dependability, yes. Profitability, no. It's being subsidized by another part of my business, but I'm still living for that great day, as we say, okay? So just explain to you, okay?
Thank you, sir, for that explanation. And I mean, that's incredible, 41 days in 30 years. So, you know, one of the other services that you offered, I think that you spoke on, and I know other witnesses have touched on, is, you know, parcel or package delivery and getting things from point A to point B. So if, you know, your service was not operating, and you're generously subsidizing that, as you pointed out, you know, if someone were to have to send something via courier or FedEx or a different way, you know, I'm presuming that would take longer than the 13 hours for your bus to get there. So, I mean, what would be the typical delivery time across the island?
I'd say you're looking at, if you were to send something St. John's to, I'll just pick a decent spot. St. John's Corner Brook, you're probably talking 48 hours. St. John's Port aux Basques, you're probably talking 72 hours. And you're looking at that anywhere. I mean, and we are right now pursuing that as an add-on. I got the expression, if there's no bums in the seats, I got to have cargo in the hole. I got to try to get revenue where I can, okay? It's only one thing pays for the bus. Someone paying for a ticket or someone paying for the package. We don't get paid to go down the highway and just look nice and pretty. And our service, I'll just tell you about our service, what we do to try to make it attractive. We have an onboard attendant. We have someone, if you want to put your unaccompanied minor, who's that's 9 years old, on our coach to go from Corner Brook to St. John's, We'll take them, sign them on, and we'll look after them just like the airline does. Okay. You want to put your mom on there who's 89 and don't know exactly where to get off. You're afraid she's going to get off in the wrong stop. We'll look after her, make sure she gets there. Now, someone would say that costs a lot of money, but it's sure cheaper than the $600,000 that CN lost last year they operated due to people not giving them the money for the tickets they sold on behalf of them. Okay. So
Sure.
it's a loss of revenue.
Yeah, no, so if it's not bums and seats or cargo in the hole, so what are some of the cost challenges that you've seen in the last, say 5-10 years that are really impacting your ability to, that are costing you at the end of the day? I mean, obviously, declining revenue is one aspect, but there must be uptick in costs. So what are they?
Sorry about that, Mr. Muse. Unfortunately, there's no time left. However, perhaps one of your colleagues would generously contribute their time to allow him to respond. Next, prochainement, nous avons Madame Koutrakis. Madame Koutrakis, la parole.
Ms. Koutrakis, you have the floor. 5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. And I would also like to say that I'm going to be sharing my time with Mr. Rogers. I'd also like to give an opportunity to Mr. Maheu to tell us his recommendations. It would be really great for the committee to hear those recommendations. Thank you. Great. Thank you very much. My first recommendation actually follows on what Danielle Côté said. So, at the federal level, there is the Rural Transport Fund, and it doesn't talk about operations. So we need to address the issue of operations. And that fund also specifies that it's not for inter-regional transport. It's really for more local transport. So there's a contradiction there. If the goal is to for the federal government to help rural areas stay connected, well, that's what the fund should do. You have access to the fund, but it's only for transport sort of around your little village or your little city of 20,000 people. It has to be available for intercity transport. It has to be able to link different cities together. So I would support that proposal. Second, well, this was a proposal made by the UMQ as well, by Mr. Côté. The Zero Emissions Transport Fund, I agree with that, but I just want to mention something here. Today, in intercity transport for long technology, you can't use electric buses. The technology isn't there. So maybe you can do 80 kilometers, but that's not really a big intercity trip on a Canadian scale. You need to be able to do like 500 kilometers, and the technology isn't there right now. Even if we'd like it to be there, it's not. We have a lot of electric vehicles in our area, particularly like school buses. And at our recent convention, we were testing out a new type of fully electric coach. But, it does have a limit. 200, 300 kilometers for a round trip, that's the limit. Of course, it'll change, but that's the way it is now. So another proposal, this is something I talked about, the federal invests billions of dollars into infrastructure, but then they cut the tax credit or tax deduction for bus transport, and that should be restored because it's important for users in small communities. For us to get to Ottawa, we have a line from Grand Remous to Maniwaki to Gatineau to Ottawa. We've been operating that line for a long time with the help of the MRC of Gatineau. And there were people who paid a monthly fee, regular passengers who paid a monthly fee. And when that change was made, that had a big impact on that service. I think that should be brought back. Now, I was giving an example about buses that are under contract for other companies. So if somebody gets on at Joliette and pays $5 or $7 to get to Montreal, they're not paying any tax on that. If you want things to be fair and you want people to use the service, they shouldn't have to pay tax on what they pay for intercity transit, so there should be no tax. Now, in Quebec, there's a gas tax credit that doesn't exist federally. So the federal government could reimburse part of the excise tax for transport. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. I did want to leave a little time for the other witness. I'm sorry for cutting you off. All right, thank you. Mr. Rogers.
Thanks, Chair. And thanks to all the people that are with us today from the transport industry. Going to go straight to Jason. Mr. Roberts, for the benefit of the committee members, would you identify what is your primary market, who rides your buses, and would you agree that Transport Canada statement that says busing is a provincial responsibility? Go ahead, Jason.
Our market is very wide. Mainly our biggest users are people who have no other means to travel. But we do have more and more people, and that's why the question was asked about our costing, and I can get a chance to answer because we ran out of time there. It's a wide range. We carry everybody. I spoke to a gentleman a couple of days ago, and he was a Revenue Canada going to do an audit somewhere on the west coast of Newfoundland. He couldn't get no flight there, so he took the bus. Okay, so it's a wide range of people, but we have a lot of people who do not have means. And hey, this time of the year in the winter, we got a lot of people who come to the bus who really need to get there and can't afford to miss their date for an appointment at St. John's, at medical appointment. They take the bus. We are known as, you want to get there, you get on the bus and we're going. It's day in, day out, 365, no stop. So we're diversified. We've got a diversification of all types of people that ride us, that take the bus around the province or with us. Numbers have leveled off pretty well on ridership. It's not declining, but expenses has gone through the roof. So we got to look for more riders to stay the same ratio.
Thank you very much, Mr. Roberts, and thank you, Mr. Rogers. Prochainement, next, nous avons...
We have Mr. Barcelot-Duval. 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Maheu, for your proposals. I did take note of them. I was listening very carefully, and hopefully we'll be able to integrate some of those proposals into the report that the committee will produce. I also wanted to ask a question to Mr. Cote. Might seem like a trick question. I understood from you that, it's important for the federal government to fund not just infrastructure, but also operating expenses. And that's something that transportation companies have told us many times. But I'd like to hear you talk about this, because some witnesses say this, and I do think it's kind of an interesting question. One witness came not that long ago and said that investments in intercity transport, were important. But the most important thing is the transportation that people use every single day in their daily lives, like transportation to their job or schools. And this witness said that it's actually more local transportation that should be the priority. Now, as the mayor of a small town and also as the representative of the UMQ, what do you think of this? There are other types of transport. People are talking about a high-speed train or regular train service in the region, small airplane transportation, and, of course, intercity bus transport. I mean, if we gave you $1 billion, where would you put the money? What would be your priority? Well, I don't think it's possible to say which one is the most important. They're all important. And it depends on people's needs. My need might be to have reliable airline service, which is not the case now, and it is a federal issue. I've heard both the federal government and the government of Quebec, talking about problems for regional airline transportation. And I'm sure you'll have the opportunity to study that at some future date. But in terms of the other needs or the other types of transportation, it depends on the needs. So there is intra-urban transport that exists, and that's often important. Often the operating costs for that are funded by municipalities who don't actually have all that much money. And so there should be some funding to support intracity transportation as well as intercity transport. And that can be important for getting to education or to the hospital, for healthcare, that type of thing. It's really important for people who live in rural areas. I was listening to Mr. Ma earlier. I think I agree with him. I mean, I really have the same concerns that he does. Bus tickets are taxed, but it's an essential service. Why is it being taxed? Why is regional airline transportation being taxed? It's an essential service. Why do you have to pay provincial tax and federal tax on that? So I don't think that should be taxed. Thank you, Mr. Cote. Thank you, Mr. Berceau-Givert.
Mr. Bachrach, the floor is yours. You have 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Professor Perry. I appreciated your testimony and the way that you've highlighted the impact of the loss of services on marginalized communities. A lot of this conversation has been about intercommunity transportation within regions, within provinces. But another important aspect of this question is interprovincial transport. And with Greyhound, riders used to be able to buy a single ticket and move between different regions of Canada. I wonder if you could speak to the way that the loss of those longer haul routes has affected the marginalized communities that you've based your research on.
Sure. Thank you very much for the question. The British North America Act is a complicated document, and where sort of transportation fits has been something that has been a kind of an object of discussion and debate. But we also know that in Canada's history, there has also been times where, we have revisited the extent to which ideas about provincial and federal jurisdiction work. And I think in this case of this particular form of transportation, it seems fairly clear that the idea that bus transportation can be easily met with an idea of provincial jurisdiction doesn't go very far. And the shift from a national carrier, which however imperfectly offered the capacity to work with one carrier, to buy one ticket, to travel between provinces, to the current kind of patchwork, which is both imperfect within the context that it exists in, but it is also extraordinarily difficult to access and to coordinate, is a real problem. And I think Manitoba kind of makes that clear in the sense that there are connections with Ontario Northland to the east. There are extremely limited connections with our kind of provincial neighbors to the west, running literally once a week and leaving after midnight. And I think what we sort of see there is the limits of the presumption that provincial jurisdiction can actually work to offer people the sort of services they need, not simply to access resources and services within a provincial context, but to, for instance, maintain ties with friends and family, to pursue opportunities, for work and for community that may exist beyond provincial borders, which are not necessarily the most relevant ones in any given context. And so in a context where, the question is the possibilities of kind of a national bus service, I think we can really see that acting as both kind of a social, an economic, and an environmental good, and one that requires us to think about kind of policy and practice beyond profitability.
Thank you very much.
A generator.
Thank you very much, Professor Perry, and thank you, Mr. Bachrach. Next, we have Dr. Lewis. Dr. Lewis, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair, and I would like to also thank all the witnesses for presenting today. My question is for Dr. Perry. Now, I'm going to refer to something that Dr. Jaffe said, and she stated that reconciliation requires transportational equity, and I'm paraphrasing her. So with the region that I represent, Haldimand Norfolk, adjacent to that is the Six Nations Reserve. And we know that many of these rural communities, and including the Six Nations reserves, have limited access to the cities by way of public transportation, and that impacts on the quality of life. So I'd like to hear from Dr. Jaffer of how she believes that reconciliation can be facilitated through transportational equity.
You started out by saying you wanted to ask this of Dr. Perry.
Yes,
so-
I'm sorry. It's Dr. Perry. Yes, Dr. Perry. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for the question. And I'm happy to share my time with Dr. Jaffe as well, who I think can speak to this in very real ways. The challenges of reconciliation are material, they're substantial, they are much more than symbolic. And I think that the very kind of lived practice of transportation shows us that in very kind of real and tangible ways. And many of the things that would make a measurable impact on the outcomes that are critical to a different relationship between non-Indigenous peoples like myself and non-Indigenous communities and Indigenous communities can be seen in something like transportation policy that would work to provide connections between Indigenous communities and other communities, but also tie Indigenous communities to each other. Some of these issues come to kind of sit in a way that gets us to think, I think, beyond our urban-rural dichotomy. We are often talking about communities, let's say in the case of Winnipeg and Brandon, that meet any definition of an urban community, but these issues of connectivity, of the inability of a private market, of the disinterest of provincial governments to provide transportation, and the way this particularly affects certain communities and Indigenous ones, and especially Indigenous women, are certainly one of those. And I think this is a very concrete way that the federal government can respond to the calls to justice from the National Inquiry on Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women, and in a less direct but also important ways, the calls to action of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
And would Dr. Jaffe have anything to add to that?
I think that Dr. Perry did a great job, but I do want to add one thing, and that is when we were working on our research with Here Today, Gone Tomorrow, our knowledge synthesis project on public transportation and vulnerability in rural and remote Canada, we held a stakeholder meeting where quite a few people from Indigenous communities came, and they discussed their problems with the lack of public transportation and how living in remote communities, this meant that when they wanted to go anywhere, it would take a tremendous amount of time. And that any time that they had a health appointment, or if they had a social services appointment, or whatever it might be, they were forced to go through a whole series of, from this bus to that bus to this service, waiting for something else to happen, where, a ride here, a hitchhike there, whatever it might be, where what might take you or me 2 hours to do, if we're living in cities, would take them perhaps 3 or 4 days. And I think it's worth understanding that it speaks to our values of society, whose time we value, and how people are excluded from participation in society because of the time and the effort that it takes to do things.
Thank you both. My next question is for Mr. Roberts. Mr. Roberts, I just want to start by thanking you for the sacrifice that you've made in keeping the transportation in your province alive. You stated that you operate DRL at a loss and that you're subsidizing it through your other businesses. How much longer do you believe that you can continue to operate at a loss and continue the level of services that you're currently providing?
That's a good question. I think the merit of that question comes to my desire to continue to do it. And if you see that someone really cares about what you're doing and is willing to come to the plate with you and play ball with you, how much longer do we do that? I don't know. As long as I can do it, I will do it. But it would be so good to know that someone was coming on board to help the situation so we can take care of the 250,000 other Newfoundlanders that's not in the big city across this 900 kilometers that's outside of the city parameters, okay?
Thank you very much,
So-
Mr. Roberts, and thank you very much, Dr. Lewis. Before I turn it over to Mr. Yakino for the final line of questioning for 5 minutes, I want to apologize to Dr. Perry. I've been referring to you as Professor Perry, but I didn't have it in my notes, but I just did some research and saw that you received your PhD from York University. So, Dr. Perry, I apologize, and now I'll turn it over to Mr. Yakino. La parole est à vous.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank all the witnesses for being here this morning to help guide us in our study here. I'd like to start with Mr. Cote. I should say, my dear fellow Quebec resident. Now, listening to your recommendations, do you think that the government of Quebec has expressed an interest in working with other levels of governments to restore some of these intercity bus lines that stop service? Well, I can't speak on behalf of the government of Quebec, but it would be, I think, a good thing for some of these lines to be restored and for some discussion to be restored between Quebec City and Ottawa. You know, sometimes the relationships are difficult, and who pays for that? Well, the citizens, the users. So we need to find common ground. For example, you know, I think each level of government should respect the other's jurisdiction, municipal, provincial, federal, and so on. Thank you very much. So I understand that you can't speak on behalf of Quebec, but you have a relationship with the province, and so has the province of Quebec expressed an interest in these types of discussions? Like what sort of things have you discussed with them? So yes, so I am in frequent discussion with the government of Quebec, and they always want to help. They always express that interest in helping and supporting municipalities, supporting intercity transport. And, you know, we're hoping that all levels of government do their part while respecting jurisdiction. So I think both federal and provincial levels need to do their part. So you have a municipal program. Could you tell us more about the municipal programs that exist? I'll get my colleague to answer. Yes, so you can see that across the regions of Quebec, there are initiatives that have been taken by different municipalities. And there's been an effort to maintain service to the population. As has been said by other witnesses, if we want to meet those objectives, most often that requires financial aid from the municipality, from the Quebec government, so that we can maintain that service. So yes, there are initiatives. People are getting creative at the municipal level, but there are also new problems in terms of resources. And it is a challenge to make sure that that service level is maintained to really serve all people across all regions in Quebec. Thank you. So, Mr. Cote, can you tell us about some of the initiatives that Quebec has suggested to you? Of course, we know that, you know, money and resources is always the hindrance, but it would be good if we could have some ideas for what we could be doing and how the province would react to that. That would help us guide our actions. So if you have any suggestions or ideas, it would be great if you could submit them to the clerk, and we would be pleased to look them over. Mr. Maheu, thank you for coming here and for coming here in person. What's your long-term strategy, given the fact that there's been a very long-term decline in ridership on intercity buses? Well, our strategy is fairly simple. So we have an Abitibi-Montreal route, and we try to keep that one sufficiently full and busy so that it can subsidize our other lines. We have 5 other lines that are all operating at a loss, but because we have decent ridership, because we've had a loss of ridership on the main line, that's been a big problem. You just asked a question earlier, so if you'll let me answer that, I would say that the government of Quebec actually did set up a financial funding program that doesn't exist in the other provinces, I believe. When a municipality agrees to support a private operator to maintain bus service, well, every dollar invested, the provincial program contributes $3. Still, some municipalities don't have the budget to do that, but there are lines in our region that were funded that way. Thank you. Sorry, I'm out of time, but I did want to ask you to give us your proposals to the clerk, because you did mention some proposals, and I don't know if we got a chance to listen to all of them. And I think that you're someone whose expertise could help guide us, because you're really on the ground facing the challenges. So it would be really useful for us to get your recommendations and to hear what type of financial aid would be useful and what it would help you do. Absolutely, I will. And I just want to mention one important thing. I wonder if anyone here in this room, around this table, knows where the bus terminal is in Ottawa. So the intercity bus station in Ottawa, does anyone know where it is? Well, I can tell you that there is no bus terminal right now in Ottawa, and that is a sign of how badly the system is doing. There's a private company that was trying to operate one, and it cut local routes, including around Vaudreuil-Soulanges, you're writing, Mr. Chair. And today, the bus station was sold off for real estate, and there are 5 companies serving Ottawa, including mine, including our brand new line. Just plugging myself there. But there are a number of other lines operating, serving Ottawa, and they all just stop at random street corners to let people off with their suitcases. This is the capital of Canada, and you don't have a bus station. Think about that. It makes no sense. And I think that, maybe this solution is bringing in public transport services who could give access to infrastructure or funding from the federal government and provincial governments. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Iaconu. And on behalf of the committee, I'd like to thank all of our witnesses for taking the time to be with us today, either in person or remotely.
Witnesses who are joining us now to please log off as we move into committee business. And with that, this meeting is suspended for 2 minutes.
you.